Welcome to my kitchen here at Seed & Sparrow Homestead. My name is Kelsey. If this is your first time hanging out, today we're going to be doing some bulk baking. I want to get my freezers stocked with meals and things to go along with those meals for my own family. Garden season is quickly approaching. My last frost date is like 6-ish weeks, 7 weeks, somewhere in there right now. And I want to make things as easy on myself as possible and have lots of ready-to-go meals I can just pull out, have dinner or lunch or breakfast, whatever I need ready to go. And I'm also doing that meal ministry for my church family. So I want to make sure I have things prepared to give to whoever is in need there as well. So today we're going to work on bread. Different types of bread. I'm gonna be doing a day or two or maybe even 3 of bulk baking. I don't actually have an entire day reserved for this, so when I have time over the next couple days, we're gonna be doing some baking. I want to do a few different recipes that are just like actual loaves of bread for sandwiches or making casseroles, other things. So we're gonna do my white bread recipe, and then I also want to do some maple oat loaves, and then I want to do some French bread, some crusty Dutch oven loaves. I want to do some dinner rolls, some crescent rolls, maybe some other things in there as well. But I want to have all of my bread items stocked in the freezer. That'll be good for like a few months, either for my family or other families in need. So let's get all the ingredients out and let's get started. Okay, let's talk flour for a minute. And throughout the course of this video, I'm gonna try and do my best to share like any tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, some troubleshooting advice. I've been baking the better part of my life since I was a kid, really, just not as frequently as I do now. For about the last decade, I've been making most of our bread type needs from scratch. Of course, continually learning. You never stop learning, but I will do my best to share things that may help if you are just getting started. This saves so much money. I mean, I can make a really good for you loaf of bread at a fraction of the cost of the good stuff at the store. It's just so much better for you. There's none of the yucky preservatives and chemicals and natural flavorings and all of the ingredients that we can't pronounce. And by baking it in bulk, it really does save a lot of time. I know so many people struggle with finding time, but if you can carve out like a few hours and just do a bulk batch of some loaves of bread and store them in your freezer, you'll be good to go for a while. The types of flour I am using today. So if you are a beginner bread baker, I would highly recommend just using an all-purpose white flour. This is organic stuff from Costco. It's the Kirkland brand. Really affordable and actually really good quality. I love this stuff, and it's just the least finicky, easiest to work with. So I would highly recommend that. Today I am going to be doing half the flour requirements using all-purpose, and then the other half I'm going to be doing a combination of things. So I have a whole bunch of whole wheat flour here I'm trying to work through. I didn't use it all up in the pantry challenge. I still have, I think, 5 or 6 bags of it. So we're gonna work through some of this today, add that in to the recipes. And then I also have some ancient grains. I have some einkorn here and some kamut back there. I have my mock mill grain mill here, so we're gonna grind up some of these grains. And I wanna add these in for their nutritional benefits, and they have awesome flavor as well. So let's get to baking. We're gonna start with my white loaf of bread. We're going to do a triple batch of that. This recipe I've had since my bridal shower. We married 9 years this year, so I've had the recipe for about 9 years now. Love it. It was given to me on a little index card inside one of the like bridal shower cards I was given, and it has been my go-to bread recipe. Has not failed me. I love it. Seems anyone else who tries it loves it as well. So for this specific recipe, we're going to be using active dry yeast. I buy this stuff in bulk. As soon as I buy it, I stick it in the freezer, and then when I open it, I'll just put it into either a mason jar or a plastic bag to put back into the freezer to extend its shelf life. We're going to use some organic cane sugar. We're going to use, this is Redmond real salt, not devoid of all the good stuff. We're going to use some honey, and then real butter, not margarine. You want to use real stuff. So I either get Kerrygold or I have the Kirkland brand that's comparable to Kerrygold here. You don't have to use butter. You can use oil if you want. I believe that's everything. So let's get to activating the yeast. Now, like I said, I am doing multiple batches of each recipe. I will make sure to put the ingredients down in the description for each recipe in today's video for a single batch. So I'm gonna do a triple batch of this white bread recipe. So I need 8 1/4 cups of water. And this is just a hair over lukewarm. You don't want it too hot, you'll kill off your yeast. You don't want it too cold, your yeast won't activate. So I've got my water in here, just a hair over lukewarm. I can stick my finger in it, not have it be too hot. We're gonna add some sugar and our yeast. So let's just talk about different types of yeast here for a moment. In most of these recipes, I am using active dry yeast. This one, most likely you should be activating it in some warm water, making sure that it is still alive and good. And sometimes you'll add in some sugar, it will feed the yeast. So this is typically used in most bread loaf recipes. It's going to provide 2 rising periods, which are required for most breads. Now the other one I'll be using is like a rapid rise instant yeast. This is finer in texture. It has added fortified enzymes which speed up the rising process, eliminating the need for a second rise. You won't find this too much in bread recipes, but you'd find it in some like quick rise rolls or some pizza dough. There are some bread recipes that have it, but the outcome isn't quite the same. It acts differently than other yeast, so you can't use it interchangeably. We're gonna cover, come back 5-10 minutes. We want it to be nice and foamy and bubbly. Then we know it is active and ready to go. Okay, let's check on this guy. Whoa. Obviously, he's ready to go. So let's get some of our other ingredients in here. I might have to split this into 2 bowls. So if you're only doing 1 batch, let me go over those amounts. You're going to mix 2 3/4 cup of warm water with 1.5 tablespoons of active dry yeast and 1 tablespoon of sugar. Allow that to sit. I have my recipe down here. That's why I'm looking down. Allow that to sit for like 5 minutes until it's bubbly. Now, per batch, we're gonna add in 1/4 cup of honey, so I have to triple that. We're also gonna do 1/4 cup of either butter or oil per batch. So I need 3/4 cup of that. So I'm gonna get this melted and do that first. That way my honey will slide out of here a little bit easier if the fat goes in first. Okay, butter is gonna go in. Then we're gonna measure out the honey. So 1/4 cup per batch. I'm gonna do 3/4 cup for my triple batch. Honey goes in. And then per batch, you need 2.5 teaspoons of salt. So I will triple that too. Okay, we've got to mix this all together. I'm going to grind up some flour and we're going to get all of that added in. So freshly milled grains, there's a learning curve there when baking with this, and I am still learning. Some things I have definitely learned is it is definitely thirstier than the pre-milled stuff, and it's different in volume. It's just much fluffier, so you just kind of have to get a feel for it. And once you start mixing, it's good to let it rest and absorb the liquid before you keep adding flour. All right, there's our freshly milled wheat. Now to add our flour, we're going to do 5 to 6 cups. So let's talk some other things. We already went over the yeast and the temperature of the water. With flour, you just want to make sure you're adding the right amount of flour. I always start with the lower amount, start mixing it, get a feel for it, and as needed, add in that last cup. If you add too much flour, you're going to have a really dense, dry, sometimes crumbly loaf. The environment can come into play. How much moisture is in the air, the type of flour you are using, if it's fresh or not. Should feel soft and pliable and somewhat smooth. It shouldn't stick to your hands too much. It's honestly something you learn. I wish I could come and just knead some bread with you and tell you how it should feel, but you do learn it over time. Sometimes you just have to accept that maybe there will be a dry loaf here and there. So what I'm doing here, I'm just making sure to combine everything pretty well, and I'm gonna let this rest. I do like to do this with all of my doughs, allow the dough to rest for 10 minutes before I continue the kneading process, just allowing all of those grains to soak everything up. I especially recommend doing this if you're using the fresh milled grains. They need that time to absorb that moisture. Otherwise, it may trick you into thinking you need to keep adding flour, and then you're gonna fall victim to a really dense, heavy bread. So I've let my dough here sit to absorb some of that moisture since I used some of the freshly milled grains. It looks good now, so I'm going to take it back out. I had to open up some flour here. Take it back out. I'm just going to lightly dust my surface. I'm going to knead it by hand for a little while. If you're just making one batch and you have like a KitchenAid or a stand mixer, you can just let that do the work for you, but not all this is fitting in mine. So we'll just do it by hand today. So when it comes to kneading, I will often use my stand mixer of a KitchenAid with the dough hook and allow it to do the work for me. You do need to knead your dough. It's going to form the gluten structure and give you that texture that you want. It should feel like it has a good spring and bounce to it, is somewhat alive. It should be nice and pliable, a smooth surface. When you stretch it, it shouldn't tear. You want elasticity. On the flip side, you can work dough too much. So I like to stick to about 6 to 8 minutes of kneading by hand. If the KitchenAid's doing it, usually 5 to 6 minutes is plenty because it does it a bit faster. So now it is going to rise until doubled, about an hour depending on the temperature of your home. So while we wait for that first recipe over there, it is on its first rise. We'll divide that out into loaves and then let it rise again. I'm going to start working on the second recipe. This one has a longer rise time, so I think it should work out with the oven, so we're not competing for oven time. It's a Dutch oven, no knead crusty loaf. I always recommend this one to anyone who is just getting started with bread baking because it's an easy one. It is honestly a no-fail recipe. There's no kneading involved. There's no guesswork. We're just gonna mix together a few ingredients, make it into a shaggy dough, and allow it to rise, and then we're gonna bake it. So super easy. I am going to do the same thing. I'm gonna activate some yeast, and then we'll add in a couple more ingredients. So for the crusty Dutch oven loaf, I'm gonna make this a double batch. I only have 2 Dutch ovens here, so that's what we're going with. So for one, you need 1.5 cups of warm water. So I've got 3 cups here, and to this, I am going to add, per recipe, 2¼ teaspoon. I almost said cups. 2¼ teaspoon of yeast, but I can't find my measurement. Hold on. You're gonna mix this one up. Same thing, allow it to activate before adding in the rest of the ingredients. All right, this one is ready to go now. So we're gonna add, per recipe, you need a ½ tablespoon of salt. So I'm gonna add in an entire tablespoon since I'm doubling. Okay. And then the only other ingredient here is flour. So let me mix this up and then we'll add in, per recipe, 3¼ cup. I'm just gonna mix this up. This is going to be somewhat shaggy, sticky dough. It shouldn't be overly sticky. If it is, we can just add a tiny bit of flour at a time until it's at least, you know, workable and not too sticky. But this looks like it's gonna be perfect. I am gonna get my hands in here though, just for ease of mixing, but like I said, we don't have to knead this. We just want it to come together into a dough. Here is what the dough looks like. Pretty sticky. pretty shaggy, like I said, does not need to be perfect. I'm gonna split this in two, and I'm going to allow those to rise for about 2 to 3 hours. It should at least double in size. So it is really warm in my house. This has risen quite a bit. I'm gonna get it out of here, and I'm gonna divide this into 6 loaves. Each recipe makes 2 loaves. I'm gonna prep my loaf pans over there, just gonna grease them, shape this dough up a bit, and then they're gonna get onto their second rise. All right, so let's take one of these blobs. I'm gonna knead it up a little bit and then press it out lengthwise into about the same length as my pan I'm gonna use. And then maybe about 6 inches wide. Just like that. I'm gonna pick this up and then start to roll it, trying to keep it about the same width throughout. I got an air bubble there. Tuck in the ends just a little bit. And then transfer to my greased pan. Just like so. And that one is ready for its second rise. I have 6 pans here. I have a whole bunch of different ones. I have glass ones, I have a stainless steel one, I have some aluminum ones. They're all totally fine. I don't love using aluminum, but it is what it is, and I have it here, so I'm using them. So I'm just gonna keep working my way through these, kneading them up a little bit, and then flattening them out, rolling them up, and getting them into their pans. So it's only been about 30 minutes, but it's very warm in my house. Rise time is going to vary greatly depending on how warm it is. Usually takes anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, and I like to see that they're about an inch above the pan line here. Then I know I'm gonna have a good end result. Much higher than that, you're gonna end up with a really like domed, super domed loaf. It might spill over the sides. It's gonna continue to rise in the oven a little. So it hasn't failed me yet. If it's an inch above the pan line before they go into the oven, I end up with a really nice loaf of bread. If you're ever unsure if it has risen enough or doubled in size, you can take your finger and poke the bread. The indent, if it stays indented, then you know it's good. If it springs back out on you, then it needs some more time to rise. So these went into a 350-degree oven for about 30 to 35 minutes. Butter all over the top because everything is better with butter. Dutch oven loaves are ready to be shaped and scored and put into their Dutch oven. So let me get these out here onto the paper. So I've sprinkled some flour on each corner here. You'll see why in a second. So we are going to get our dough ball here. We're gonna put it onto the corner with the flour, and we're just gonna kind of pinch it together. If it's not in like a decent shape, it does not need to be perfect, but I mean honestly that's fine. Just in somewhat of a round loaf shape. And then we're gonna take this, we're gonna put it into the center. Just flip it right on over. Brush some of that flour down. Then we're gonna quickly score it. You can just do one deep score off to the side, or just do like a cross in the center here. So I've had my Dutch ovens in a 450-degree oven, getting nice and toasty. That one has some cornmeal in it. I find that one, if I don't have some cornmeal on the bottom of the loaves get really tough and sometimes burn. So that's why that's there. We're just going to grab our loaves with our parchment paper and stick them right on in there. After about 10 minutes, I do like to come and take them out of their pans. Otherwise, you're gonna end up with like condensation happening down in here and they get really mushy and soggy. I'm slowly amounting a lot of flour over me, to be expected. So the Dutch oven loaves are gonna take about 30 minutes. Then we're gonna remove the lid and bake for another 10 minutes or so till they get nice and golden brown. So now I'm gonna move on to another recipe. We're gonna make some hamburger buns. I'm actually gonna use some of these for dinner tonight, but I'm gonna make at least, I think, a double batch. So it'll get me around 40 hamburger buns. So I'm gonna use Ruth Ann Zimmerman's hamburger bun recipe. I'll link her YouTube channel in the video I found this recipe in. I use either her recipe or Jill Winger's recipe. I like both of them. They definitely taste different, both equally good. Jill's, I think, takes a bit more work. It's a bit more labor intensive and more rise time. So Ruth Ann's is just kind of really simple and straightforward. That's the one I'm choosing to do today, but I will link both of their recipes down in the description if you want to give them both a try. So let's get to work on that one. So for Ruth Ann's hamburger buns, I've got this concoction here. This is milk, water, butter, honey, and salt. So for one batch, you need 1 cup of milk, 3/4 cup of water, a 1/2 cup of melted butter, 3 tablespoons of honey, and a teaspoon of salt. And you heat all of that up. Again, you just kind of want it right about lukewarm, a little bit more. Now we're going to add our yeast. So for one batch, it's 2 tablespoons. I'm doubling, so I'm going to throw in 4 tablespoons of yeast. Mix this up and wait for it to start to get foamy. I forgot to mention, this recipe calls for the instant dry yeast. So this one only really has 1 rise time. So we're gonna get this out, knead it for about 6 minutes, and then it's gonna go into a bowl, covered to rest for only 10 minutes. So we remove the lids, allow these to go for their 10 minutes until they're nice and golden brown, and look at these loaves. Just a couple ingredients, almost no work, and you have these yummy, crusty loaves that are the best for dipping in soup. Back to Ruth Ann's hamburger buns. Another thing I love about this recipe is there's no shaping involved. You just roll it out to about 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch thick, and then you use a cutter. I'm just using the top of a wide mouth mason jar, but whatever you can find around the kitchen will work. We're going to preheat our oven to 375 degrees. Set these on a parchment lined cookie sheet. Cover them and allow them to rise for about 30 minutes. They should double in size. Into the oven they go to bake for about 12 minutes or until they are nice and golden brown. Now we're going to make some crescent rolls. This is another recipe that calls for the quick or instant rise yeast. This doesn't necessarily need to be activated, but the recipe said to dissolve it in some warm water, so that's what I did. So to the stand mixer, we're going to cream some butter and sugar. I am doubling this recipe. So for one recipe, you just need 6 tablespoons of softened butter and a 1/3 cup of granulated sugar. You'll cream together. Then you're going to add in some eggs, 2 for one batch, and you're going to mix after each addition. Now in goes the yeast mixture. For a single batch, it was 1/2 cup of warm water and 2 tablespoons of instant yeast. Then we've got some salt, 2 teaspoons. We're going to do 1 cup of warm milk. Finally, we add the flour, 5 to 5.5 cups. I allowed the dough hook to knead this for me for about 5 minutes. It's still just a little bit sticky, but it should pull away from the sides of the bowl. We'll cover this and allow it to rise until doubled, about 30 minutes. Here are the hamburger buns all done. Don't they look amazing? They look so much like what you would buy in the store, but they taste 10 times better. Back to the crescent roll dough. My favorite part of all the recipes is just punching it down. There's something so satisfying about it. But we're going to get this out and we're going to divide this into 4 segments. And I am going to roll this out into about 14 to 16 inch circles. Once achieved, we're going to divide it into 12 sections. We're going to start to roll from the widest end to the narrow end, making sure to tuck that end on the bottom, and we're going to just curve them ever so slightly. These sat on a parchment-lined cookie sheet, covered for about 30 to 45 minutes until they doubled in size. They bake at 350 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes or until golden brown. And you can brush them with butter if you would like when they are done. I wanted to show you how nicely this white loaf slices. You can get really thin slices with no crumbling, no breaking. It's still super soft. It has a beautiful texture, very fluffy, and you can squeeze it and it springs back. You know you have a really good loaf of bread. Now I like to store all of my bread items in some sort of bag, and I will keep them in the fridge. That's where they're going to stay freshest the longest. You know that if you're making bread at home, it doesn't have the preservatives in it, so it's not going to last as long. That's just something you have to come to terms with. It will go stale or mold on the counter fairly quick. It only lasts about maybe 3 days on the counter. So in the fridge it goes, but if I want to save it for long term, I just wrap it. This is a really thick poly bag that I got from one of the Amish stores around here, and it'll go into the freezer and it'll last like 3 to 4 months. Now it doesn't always last that long for us because we eat it before then, but I wouldn't really recommend storing it any longer than that. It might start to take on some of the flavors of the freezer. Not saying it wouldn't be good to eat, it'd still be fine to eat, but it might not taste as good. I'll also use the gallon freezer Ziploc bags for things like these hamburger buns. I usually store them in packs of 8, just kind of like how you'd get at the grocery store. That's usually the amount that we would use for our family per meal. It's the next day. It got kind of late last night and I ended up getting really tired and I just quickly wrapped everything up, called it a night. So we're back at it today, day 2. I did want to show you how the crescent rolls turned out. They look beautiful. I've got 3 bags of them here. I wasn't actually expecting them to get this big. They looked pretty tiny as I was rolling them up, but they puffed up very nicely. So I'm pleased with those. So we're just gonna move on to some more things today. It's midday. It's nearly 1 o'clock. We had our meat birds come in this morning, so I had to run to the post office and get them all set up. And then one of my kiddos wasn't feeling well, so getting started later than I wanted to. So we're gonna see how much time I have to get a few recipes in today. I'm hoping to get at least 3 more done, and I will be pleased if I get those 3. So we're gonna work on another sandwich loaf. We're gonna do some maple oat sandwich loaves from Jill Winger's The Prairie Homestead cookbook. I've talked about this book before. I love it. It's more than just a cookbook. There's lots of great information in here. Highly recommend getting it. And I mean tons of great recipes. So I'll link it down in the description. So I'm gonna get my ingredients out and we're gonna get to work on that. For our maple oat sandwich loaves, so I've got some water on the stove boiling and we're gonna pour that over these ingredients. So I have, this is 3/4 cup butter. You only need a 1/4 cup if you're just doing a single batch, which will get you 2 loaves. So I'm gonna make 6 loaves today. Butter goes in. We need 1 cup of rolled oats per batch. Oh, I seem to have misplaced things. And then we need 1½ cups total maple syrup, or 1/2 cup per recipe. Tablespoon of honey per recipe. 2½ teaspoons salt per batch. And then 1 teaspoon of cinnamon per batch. So this recipe is obviously a little bit on the sweet side. It's not overly sweet, it has a little bit of spice because of the cinnamon. Still great as a sandwich bread. We like it for sandwiches, but we love it for breakfast things. Obviously French toast. My plans for all of these loaves of bread is some French toast casseroles to keep in the freezer to give out to people. But I also love it when I was eating gluten as like soda in a hole. So you cut out a circle from your piece of bread, fry it up in butter in a cast iron skillet, and then crack an egg into that hole you cut out and just cook it over easy. It's so good. Something about the savory egg with a little bit of sweet and the toast is just, it's really good. So I have, my boiled water here. And you want it to be boiling so it cooks the oats and melts all of that butter. Now we're gonna let this sit for like 15-20 minutes and let it do that. Now it's time to add in our active dry yeast. We're doing 1 tablespoon per batch, so I'm gonna do 3. You do want to make sure that your mixture has cooled down, and like I said before, whatever liquid you are putting your yeast into, if it's too hot, it's just going to kill your yeast. Mix this up and we'll start adding in the flour. For this recipe, we need about 5 to 5½ cups of flour. It will give you 2 loaves. So same process, we're gonna mix this up. I'm gonna let it rest for 10 minutes. I'm gonna continue kneading it for about another 6 until it's nice and smooth. But I want to quick touch on a few other troubleshooting things, just in case you were to encounter them. So if your bread doesn't rise, I'm gonna say it's either too cold in your home or your yeast was dead. If you have bread that is too dense, most likely too much flour, or it could just be the type of flour you are using. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is if you have issues with your bread collapsing on you. If it rises and then it falls, it's most likely overproofed. It rose too long and then it just kind of caves in on itself. So we covered that dough. We let it rise until doubled, about an hour. And then we're going to come back and we're just going to do a quick shaping. This one is not really a finicky recipe at all, so I'm just kind of shaping them into some logs, tucking in the ends and getting them into some greased pans, covering them and allowing them to rise until doubled again, about another 30 minutes to an hour. Now we're going to make some really simple French bread. I am just going to do one recipe here. It'll give me 2 loaves. It's just something I wanted to have to send along with some of my meals for people, especially pasta dishes. So this is just 1.5 cups warm water, 1.5 teaspoons of dry yeast, active dry yeast, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 3 to 3.5 cups of flour. So I wanted to give you a good example of what kneading does to a dough. Take a look at this one and how shaggy it is. Very easily torn. I can stretch it and it just tears to pieces. We don't want that. So after working it for about 6 minutes, you can see how much smoother the dough is here. I'm stretching it and it is not tearing. So it's got some nice elasticity. We'll get this into a bowl and cover it, allow it to double in size about 1 hour. Our maple oat loaves are ready to go in the oven. They'll bake at 350 degrees for about 35 to 40 minutes. These do have a tendency to get pretty brown on top, so if you see them getting too brown, you could just stick some aluminum foil over the top for the last maybe 10 or 15 minutes or so. Back to shaping our French bread. I'm going to split this in 2, and we're going to roll it out into a rectangle, maybe about 8 inches by 12. I'm going to fold it long way across itself and pinch all of the seams all the way around. Once that's done, I will then start to roll it up. Again, pinching the seam along the bottom and on the side, tucking in the ends a little bit. Gonna transfer this to my French bread pan. Totally not necessary. You can just stick it on a cookie sheet. I'm gonna score it and allow it to rise again until doubled. The last recipe we're gonna cover in this bulk baking bread extravaganza are some of my favorite dinner rolls. This is by Tegan Gerard at Half Baked Harvest. I love a lot of her recipes. She is great. I tried these for Thanksgiving last year and then I made them for Christmas, and now I'm making them for Easter this year. I'm gonna bring these and some of the Crescent Rolls to Easter dinner. I promise you, you make them and everyone will love you. They're just so, so good. So real quick, because I didn't mention it, this recipe is 2 packs of the Rapid Rise yeast, 1 teaspoon salt, 2 cups milk, 6 tablespoons honey, 8 tablespoons butter, 2 large eggs, and 6.5 to 7 cups of flour. I am brushing an egg wash over the French bread, and that's going to go into a 450 degree oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. To get that nice kind of leathery crust characteristic of French bread, you're going to stick a cookie sheet on the bottom rack, and after you've placed your French bread in there, you're going to throw about a half cup of cold water onto that tray and quickly close the oven door, creating some steam. It'll give you that nice leathery crust. The rolls get divided into 4 segments. You take one of them and roll it out into a 12 by 12 square, and then using a pizza cutter, I cut it into 6 strips. I brushed it with some honey butter, and then you just roll it up, put the seam sides down in a greased 9 by 13 pan, and we're going to allow this to rise until doubled. These bake at 350 degrees for about 25 to 30 minutes. After they come out of the oven, I make some more honey butter. It's really just about equal parts honey to butter, and brush it all over the top. There you go, friend. 7 super yummy recipes to add to the arsenal. I promise you they're all so worth making, and I'm so excited to have all of this bread in my freezer to last us, honestly, quite a few months. Bulk baking is honestly where it's at. I don't get to do it so much anymore because time is hard to come by, but it is the best way to actually save some time in the long run and save a whole bunch of money. Thank you for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed this day of bulk bread baking. If you did enjoy this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Go ahead and comment what you are most interested in trying, and let me know if you have any questions. I'd be happy to help you out. Many blessings on your coming week, friend. I will see you next time. Take care.